Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. We are so glad that you are joining us. We are rolling into the holiday weekend, and for a lot of the state's lawmakers, business leaders, and educators, they'll be packing their bags for the annual trek up north next week for the Detroit Regional Chamber's Mackinac Policy Conference. The state's biggest decision makers are all in one place, focusing on Michigan's future and tackling some of the toughest issues that we are facing. That is where we are starting tonight with our contributors Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press, and back here on MiWeek, the CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber, Sandy Baruah. Sandy, it's good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Christy. Great to be back.
Well, you know what? We are heading up for the Mackinac Policy Conference next week, so why don't you go ahead and tell us what we can expect to hear on the official agenda before we start talking about what I think is on the not official agenda.
Right, there's the agenda and there's the agenda, right? So every year our CEO committee picks 3 issues to focus on because you can only do so many things and we don't want to repeat agenda items year after year. So this year, urban education, primarily funding models. We're looking at funding models, and we're obviously going to be talking about DPS. You can't avoid it, a huge issue. Secondly, we're going to be talking about investing in our future. We have key industries in this state that if we don't protect and grow, we're going to have a real challenge. That's defense, that's mobility, that's IT, it's healthcare, and we need to focus on those industries to make sure that they're successful, so that's going to be on the agenda. And the last is entrepreneurship, and we're doing some fun things, some really fun things around entrepreneurship, including the Mackinac Policy Conference's first ever pitch competition, and we're bringing in Damon John from Shark Tank.
Oh, nice. So how's that going to work?
Hopefully well.
So like the show.
So what we've done is that working with our partners in the west side of the state, they went through a competition on the west side of the state to pick one company, one entrepreneur company to send up to the Mackinac Policy Conference. They picked a company called Fathom that makes underwater drones. We did a thing at the Detroit Policy Conference, which you guys were at, and we went through a similar process, a pitch competition, and we picked here in Detroit a company called Detroit Ento that makes edible bugs.
What's that say about the different cultures on the 2 sides of the state? You got underwater drones, and you got crickets over here.
So the edible bug thing is fascinating because when you look at how much farmland we're going to need to feed the growing planet, we don't have enough farmland. And so getting protein, and the thing with these bugs is that bugs are, and some bugs, not all bugs, are an incredible source of protein. So it's an incredibly cost-effective way of protein. Underwater drones, obviously, incredibly cool technology. So they're both kind of game-changing technologies. So Damon John, along with a couple celebrity judges, including Paul W. Smith, will pick the winner.
Oh, that'll be great.
It'll be fun.
Yeah. Mackinac has become known for the place where the legislature and the governor try to work out all the kinks in the
Grand bargain,
budget,
great example.
before they break for summer. There was some talk that the House might stay behind this year. I think they've walked that back just a little. We've got some big issues hanging out there, big policy issues hanging out there in the legislature. Do you expect that this year those things, even though they're not on the agenda necessarily, will become sort of the focal point of
well, I think DPS is going to be on the agenda and on the agenda.
And on the agenda.
Exactly, to Christy's point. So we're going to have DPS on stage. We're going to be talking about funding models on stage. But I'm really hopeful that the House of Representatives is still going to make it up there. In fact, last I heard, the Speaker, who I've got a lot of respect for, is hoping to wrap up session sometime Thursday, so they can get their Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, and for Friday's session, which would be fantastic. And it is an opportunity for the legislators to hear directly from the business community from all parts of the state in terms of what they're thinking. And it's also an opportunity to talk to House members, Senate members, and the governor's team, in a unique environment. I mean, we're not in formal offices, everyone's without a tie, you're standing on the front porch of the Grand Hotel. It's a different vibe.
Well, I mean, they may get this school deal done by Thursday when they come up. So how does that change the dynamic?
Well, you know, your paper, Ingrid, who's done some amazing reporting on this, you know, is reporting that there's potentially a deal for the $500 million, you know, just to kind of handle the debt issue. If that's the case, that's wonderful.
Plus $100 million for startup.
Right, and so, but there's still some issues in terms of how much is really needed for the startup for the new DPS to be successful, and the other issue is the Detroit Education Commission. You know, how are we going to have a system like other cities that have a successful charter and public school community? How are we going to be able to regulate that?
But at this minute, I mean, at this moment, the DEC is gone. They've agreed to set it aside for now. So is there another model that you think that the business community could help come up with to accomplish the same thing without being so frightening to charters?
Well, again, we're not trying to, first of all, the Detroit Regional Chamber, we're incredibly supportive of charters. We're one of the leading organizations that were advocating for charters, and we still advocate for a robust charter system. It's just that we have looked at what is our success in Detroit in particular about the success of charter schools versus other cities across the country, in many cities which I have lived in. And the key element that we find is that there is some sort of entity that's controlling opening and closings and monitoring the success and the performance of schools. So does it have to look exactly like the DEC? No, we're certainly open to other things, but it needs to have some sort of system that ensures that bad schools, either public or charter, can't get replicated, and that we don't have an overabundance of schools in some part of the city and a dearth of schools in other parts of the city. Right now, we don't have that in Detroit, and we're paying a price for it.
And we're the only city, by the way, that does it that way.
Right.
And you can't go anywhere else and find this sort of wild
But
west.
whether that's right or wrong, they're not going to pass the legislation, it looks like, with that in it. So that's likely an issue for another day to settle.
Go ahead, Sandy. If you
I was
want
going
to
to
take
say,
one last crack at
you
that.
know, the business community, a lot of them who are going to be up at Mackinac support something like the DEC. I mean, there's probably different versions of it, but you know, one of the reasons why many of the best performing national charter organizations have not come to the city of Detroit is because there isn't this regulatory scheme, and it is the Wild West, as Stephen rightly points out, and that has kind of prevented some of those organizations from coming into town.
You know, we've been covering, the Detroit Public Television has now been streaming, I think it's going on our 6th year, the Mackinac Policy Conference, so people are able to see actually what goes on up there, because some of the criticism is, well, what do they actually do up there at the Grand Hotel? But I think it's also interesting because we've been able to see where the state has been kind of coming up and down and some of the highs and lows. Sandy, in terms of business and where we are in the state of Michigan in attracting business and growing business, how would you say that we're doing right now, where we are at this time this year?
We're doing phenomenally better than we were a handful of years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Phenomenally better. One, you know, businesses had a do not visit. Michigan had a do not visit reputation with international and domestic businesses. Our tax structure was ununderstandable and expensive. Our regulatory scheme was not good. I mean, you know, people were scared of unions. You know, all that has fundamentally changed. So we have done a good job attracting, and you look at our unemployment rate across the state, we are now at or below the national average as a state. I mean, that's phenomenal. Who would have thought that would have happened in Michigan 10 years ago or during the dark days of the Great Recession? So that has gone phenomenally well. We do have issues that we need to address. Education is one of the primary ones we need to address. Funding for higher ed is another one, and basic infrastructure. I mean, Flint obviously is the red flashing light, but you know, we still have a roads issue. We have a bridges issue.
But Sandy, there were two announcements this past week that signaled to me that things have fundamentally changed in Michigan. One is the new parts plant that's going to be built in Detroit. That's a major manufacturing facility.
Flexengate.
Flexengate. And
Saeed Khan.
And right, and I can remember just a few years ago, the popular wisdom was Detroit would never get another major manufacturing facility.
Right.
It would never get another mega plant. And I mean, this is a big plant, and it promises to get bigger. And then
it's not the last one that's coming. There's other things in the works.
I mean, so that has changed that dynamic in just a very short period. Plus, you had Google saying, we're going to bring a self-driving car system here instead of Silicon Valley. And I think it's one of the things people were waiting to see, how we were going to hang on to that piece of the business here in Detroit.
So there's two challenges there. So one, I mean, Michigan and the Detroit region in particular, we have to own that next generation of mobility, which is moving our automotive business from a product-based business to a service-based business and doing this V2V, V2I. We need to own that. If we don't own that, we're in trouble. That's kind of the Google piece. The other piece, which is what's great about Flex and Gate and what the big three are doing, or what places like American Axle are doing, is that we need more jobs for Detroiters who may not have the technical skills that Google is looking for. So we need to do both things simultaneously, and Mike Duggan gets that. And he's working on both.
Mike Duggan will be a front and center at the conference as well. What other, I guess, little storylines do you expect to come out? A lot of talk about politics, presidential and statewide as well.
Well, I think the 2016 presidential race might increase our bar tab a little bit, just because I think people are so frustrated with how the 2016 election is going to go. We're going to do something interesting and something we've never tried before. We're doing a kind of a meet the press style or flashpoint style on-stage interview. So we've got Soledad O'Brien and Harold Ford, and they're going to be joined by, two members of Congress, then two business leaders, and then two political pundits, just talking about national political issues and how it relates to Michigan. So that's going to be interesting, and I think it's going to be really popular. But again, I think our bar tab's going to be high this year.
And it's that'll be probably because of Stephen. Go ahead. Last question for you. Go ahead.
Sandy, I had a conversation with Carrie Moss, who's the executive director of the ACLU, an interview that's going to air next week. She's pretty critical of the absence of Flint in the sort of formal agenda of the conference. You do have some pieces in there. Mona Hanna-Attisha will speak briefly, but talk about why not make Flint, which is the story that come out of Michigan so far this year, why not make it more of a centerpiece of this conference, given the many different policy debates and issues that led to it and that will have to be dealt with on the back end?
Yeah, I'm surprised Carrie's concerned about it. And first of all, she never expressed any concern to us, so I'm happy to talk to her about it. But we think we're doing a really good job of talking about Flint. So we're doing several things around Flint. One, as you mentioned, Dr. Mona is center stage. We're doing an entire fundraising campaign around the Child Health and Development Fund, both a presence in the hotel and I can't. Just look for a major on-stage presence about fundraising. Dan Kildee's on stage participating. He's going to be talking about infrastructure issues. So we have got a whole kind of Flint theme that's going to run all throughout the conference. I was delighted that Mayor Weaver decided to come to the conference, and she'll be there. So we've got Flint there. Now, if people are looking for us to kind of re-adjudicate the Flint issue and try to who's to blame to who's to blame, we're not going to play that game.
Well, but even beyond that, the question of investment in cities or the disinvestment in cities, the question of disinvestment in infrastructure, the things that made Flint possible and really caused it. Debate over the emergency manager law. The governor himself says we probably ought to go look back and adjust it to accommodate a little more democratic voice, things like that. Why not make those things sort of, again, centerpieces of the conference?
Well, some of those things that you mentioned, I think, are going to be covered. I mean, that's why Dan Kildee's on stage, and I think Dan's going to hit on all those issues. The debate over the emergency manager law. You're right, that's not on the agenda. We only have so much time and room, and our agenda gets set pretty early, and so the whole idea of education and funding, which we knew was going to be an issue, investing in our future in those critical industries, and entrepreneurship. Those are themes that we said in early. So, we've woven Flint through.
All right. Well, Sandy, we look forward to seeing you up on Mackinac Island next week, as always, and thanks so much for joining us on MiWeek.
Great. Thanks for having me.